Hi everyone, sorry about the glitch with the recording. I intended to post this early in the morning, but it didn't work, the one that was prepared. So I'm going to try to do like an abbreviated version, especially for those that were yesterday that were not able to attend for whatever reason. So I wanted to make sure that you have access to at least a little bit of the narrated version of this PowerPoint. So we're going to go real quick over things that we talked about yesterday. I'm going to skip the first part as you can read about these. Although there is one aspect, about what is syntax and what is grammar, right, that I would like to highlight because it might have been not that clear yesterday. And it's the fact that when we look at language from a linguistics perspective, we are not that concerned with meaning and but with form and function. And I think it's important to highlight this distinction. Um, and I am not sure that I mentioned yesterday, but just to contextualize this, there is a beautiful study that was done in the 2000s, in the early 2000s, in which monolingual speakers, English monolingual speakers and bilingual speakers responded differently. And basically is this, they provided the students, right, with one sentence. And the question was, is this sentence correct? And the sentence was something like, I cannot remember on top of my head the exact wording of the sentence, but something in the nature like, I don't I don't know, like cotton grows on trees, or I don't know, or something like that, right? Something silly, candy grows on trees, something silly like that, right? Well, um, most, right, like an extraordinarily large percentage of English monolingual students responded that the sentence was not correct, right? And okay, and that was the question, right? Is this sentence correct? And the sentence again was whatever, candy grows on trees. And again, monolingual speakers responded that that was not correct. However, bilingual speakers majoritarily responded yes. And the explanation from that is basically that uh, monolingual individuals tend to look at language only from the point of view of meaning. What does that mean, right? However, and from that point of view, the sentence was not correct, right? So both said it was not about being correct or incorrect for the students, right? But they're sort of to figure out their reasoning process. So basically, this group of monolingual students paid attention to meaning, and they responded from this perspective that obviously candy does not grow on trees, so therefore the question is not correct, right? That sentence is not correct. However, multilingual learners or bilingual learners responded yes because they were looking at that not only from the meaning perspective, but from the does this make sense rather than is the meaning correct? And I think that that's a very important distinction whenever we think about linguistics. We discussed that when we were talking about phonetics and phonology, right? That we were not really concerned with the symbols that we write, but with the sounds that we make, right? And the same thing with morphemes, with words, right? We try to break down words into other units. And again, the importance is not the meaning. I mean, obviously, the words have to make sense, they have to have meaning. But when we're looking at morphology, don't really care much about the meaning. We care about the form and the function that words take. And the same thing is for syntax. The meaning is unimportant as long as we are making sense. The idea is to look at, okay, what are the constituents or the components of these sentences and how they are organized to make meaning, regardless of what that meaning may be. And that's really what we are looking at, right? We're breaking down language in small components to get an understanding of how language works. That's basically it. So it's basically looking at linguistic awareness, to be aware about how language works. Well, hopefully that will help you at least conceptualize a little better these morphology and syntax lessons, which I know can be very dry and are a lot. So, and basically in that categorization, right, like to break down language, we found 8 different lexical categories. 4 that are open, remember about then, nouns, adjectives, verbs, and adverbs, right? Those are the open categories, and we gave some explanation of their form and their function, right? So what do they look like typically, right? For example, how does a noun typically look like, right? Well, it can take plural, right? That we know, right? We say um, one car, but we say two cars. It takes an S, and that S in nouns means that there are several. That we're talking about several, not only one. And the other characteristics of nouns is that they occur after determiners and adjectives, right? There's another, in terms of the functionality of nouns, that we can argue why something in a sentence, right, a specific word, a specific constituent or component of a sentence is a noun. And the same thing for adjective, right, that they take comparative and superlative, right, that they can be in the predicative or attributive manner, right? They are in attributive manner, remember, in predicative manner when they're used with the verb to be, okay, with the verb to be. So, and then verb, which we had a very intense discussion about verbs, but remember that the function of verbs, right, it's to indicate when something is happening, how that is happening, right? And we talked about both continuity and perfection. So in terms of verbs, like when we say I am going, right? That's continuity, and that tells us that the action is going on right now, right? Like I am cooking or I am sailing, right? Versus saying I have sailed, which means that you started to sail at some point, right? And you may continue up to the present. You may say, I have sailed for 2 years now. And that may indicate that you may still be sailing, right? We're not sure about it, but we leave that possibility open. Versus if we say, I sailed 2 years ago, we know that that happened 2 years ago and it started and ended in the past, so to speak. Again, those are characteristics of verbs and how they show up, right, when we use them. We also talked about voice, the two voices, passive and active voice, and the different characteristics. And finally, although we didn't discuss this much because in English it's not that important, we talk about mood. And typically in Romance languages, there are two. If you've learned Spanish, you know you've struggled with subjunctive a lot. That's the mood, subjunctive versus indicative, and how each of those moods are used. And then we discussed the four categories of verbs in English between regular, irregulars, auxiliary, and modal verbs. Please review that. Verbs that can take or not take objects, right? But we differentiated transitive, intransitive, and detransitive, right? So please review that as well. And the last category, the last lexical category for this open class is adverbs. And we have four close categories, lexical categories, which are these ones: prepositions, conjunctions, pronouns, and determiners. And we also provided a description, right, of their form and function over there. And that, again, is what we're looking at, right? From our point of view, this is what we want to know. We want to understand that these are characteristics of these lexical categories so that we can identify them, right, and justify why we identify them within a sentence. All right. So with that, right, we talked about the constituents, which are basically the components of a sentence, and we divided them into large initial categories, which were the subject, right, like in the case of the old woman, which is a noun phrase, and the predicate or the verse sentence, right? Which is brought a large snake from Brazil. And then we broke them further down, right, into a little larger chunks than words, right? Chunks that cover several words, but that are full constituents of a sentence. Later, we did an exercise, and we will review, in which we have to determine if underlying components in sentences are or are not constituents, right? And we'll describe that in a minute. But there are four tests that you can do to that particular underlying section, or whatever section of a different sentence that you want to understand if it's a constituent or not. And if you apply these four tests, if one of them is positive, if it's okay, then it's a constituent. But we'll see that in a minute when we look at these four constituents tests. So for example, the first one is replacement. You can do a replacement test. So for example, if you think in the movies, the students saw a movie, is a movie a constituent? Well, we can try to replace it. The replacement test consists of replacing that chunk, that section, that constituent, right? A movie with one pronoun. In this case, obviously, the pronoun that is corresponds, right, is an object pronoun because this is in the object position. And the object pronoun for a movie in English is it. And we can, right? The students saw it. It's important to say that in the replacement test, both sentences have to have equal meaning, right? That's the idea, that it doesn't change meaning. The same we can do with the students saw a movie about dinosaurs. If we want to substitute a movie, we substitute with it. And then we can also try a different test, like the movement test. So we can try to move that underline, that constituent, right? Or that potential constituent, that chunk, we can try to move it in the sentence and try if it doesn't change meaning. Like in this case, we're trying to test if at that strange little shop is a constituent. So we move it at the beginning of the sentence. At that strange little shop, I bought a scarf. The sentence holds the same meaning and it makes sense. So therefore, at that strange little shop is indeed a constituent. There are two more. Eight clefs. Eight clefs, as you know, are clefs in English that start with it was whatever that. It was me that closed the door, for example, right? So we what tried to do, right? The same thing in this case, we are trying to check if a movie is a constituent in the sentence, the students saw a movie after class. And what we do is we use a clef sentence in which we use the movie as the referent, right? It was a movie that the students saw after class. Yes, it works. So therefore, it's a constituent. And finally, we can ask a question. My brother baked these cookies. What did your brother bake? These cookies, right? We were trying to determine if these cookies is a constituent in the sentence, my brother baked these cookies. So we asked, what did your brother bake? And the response is the cookies. So therefore, it's a constituent. So remember, I'm going to go back just real quick. The replacement test, the movement test, the it cleft sentence test, and the question test. You can use those four to determine if these chunks of these parts of the sentence are indeed constituents. And then we played around with these two sentences, right? Trying to identify each of the constituents in the sentence and then analyzing them. And this is what we came up with, right? For all of these sentences, we identified the subject, like a large number of people, right? And the predicate, resigned from their work after the pandemic. And then of those constituents, we identified within the subject, this is a noun phrase, and we left it as a chunk that. The verb resign, we know that it's in the past. From their work is a prepositional phrase. And after the pandemic is another prepositional phrase. And the same thing we did with the director, made some questionable remarks during the meeting. We basically identified each of the constituents and we analyzed what roles they play in the sentence. So like you can see over here. Great. And then we went into the exercises. The first one I'm going to go real quickly because we had a similar one last week with the morphology, and it's basically to identify the parts of speech, right? I gave you between parentheses several abbreviations that stand for noun, adverb, adjective, adverb, preposition, determiner, complementizer, auxiliary verb, right? But auxiliary, pronoun, conjunction, respectively. That's what this is asking us, right? To identify this. So we went over them, and here was the responses, right? Basically, that's what I want you to do, I believe, in one of the exercises of the quiz. But that's exactly what we did. Nothing else than that. In exercise number 2, we basically had several words that were underlined, and we had to identify the part of speech of this underlined word only. So in the first sentence, Barry Bonds hit another home run. We determined that hit is a verb. And to justify, indeed, right, to give our piece of evidence, and again, remember, it's morphological or syntactical evidence, okay, that belongs, that this indeed is a tense, that this indeed is a verb. what we identified is that this verb is in the past tense, and verbs in the simple present or in the present simple, third person singular, like this case is, buried bones, takes S. So if we put this verb in the present, it becomes heads, adding this as third person singular that regular verbs in English take in the present tense. So that's one of the justification. We also argued that it could be used, right, with a variety of verbal constructions, using auxiliary verbs, such as bury was hitting, for example, another home run, or bury has hit another home run. The same thing for the sentence number 2, in which we had to determine what part of speech crazy is. And we determined it was an adjective, and the evidence that we gave for that is that it takes comparative, right? From crazy, it becomes crazier or craziest. The sentence number 3, and remember that only adjectives, right, take comparative ER or superlative. Only an adjective does that. So that's why that's one piece of morphological evidence, basically. And sentence number 3, we were trying to figure out what part of speech stand is. And again, we determined it was a noun, right? We know that stand can be a verb, but it's not a verb in this sentence. Why? That's why we need the morphological evidence, right? In this sentence, because it's preceded by a determiner, and it could potentially take a plural, right? So we can say, for example, with this incident to the board members, with this incident, the board members take different stands, for example, against the president. It's another example, right? But it would be possible for stand to take a plural in this context. And finally, the sentence number 4, we tried to determine what part of speech they was. And the same way, we providing very similar evidence as in the first case, we determined that it's indeed a verb. Then we had these different sentences in which we were trying to prove if the underlined section within the sentence, the entire underlined section is or is not a constituent. And we gave evidence using the syntactic test that I just spoke about. So the first one, we were trying to determine that the green spotted frogs in the nearby brackish pond is or is not a constituent. We use the substitution. We use the pronoun they, because this is in the subject, right? In this case, it's in the subject position. It's functioning as a subject. The green spotted frogs in the nearby brackish pond is wholly functioning as a subject. So we need a subject pronoun or a personal pronoun to substitute it. They sang heartily for half of the moonless night. Work. So perfect. We did also an additional test. We asked a question: who sang heartily for half of the moonless nights? The response obviously can be the green-spotted frogs in the nearby brackish ponds. Then therefore, we determine that is indeed a constituent. For the second sentence, we did the same thing. The IRS mailed my father a letter. We knew that my father, in this case, is the indirect object. That's the function of that constituent in this sentence. And we proceeded to substitute it with him in order to determine if it was a constituent or not. It worked, so definitely it was a constituent. And the third sentence, right? We did an initial test. You can see them there. In this case, the question also worked, and also movement works, right? And as you can see, and therefore we can determine that my father, in the sentence, the IRS mailed my father a letter, is indeed a constituent. We were trying to figure out in sentence number 3, Halloween, the kids dressed up as, right, as a constituent of this sentence, and we determined it's not a constituent. You can try tests, the 4 tests, and you can see that none of them work. So, and finally, a mechanic needs to fix the bottom bracket of my bike, We analyzed that one too. We substituted and we asked a question, and we determined that it's indeed a constituent. In this case, it's a direct object. So it's working as a direct object. And the second part was precisely that. So was determined, I was underlining specific constituents, and I was asking you to determine, right, if they are a subject, if they are a direct object or if they are an indirect object, right? And you can see what our final conclusions were over there. The first one is a subject. The second one is working as an indirect object. The third one is a direct object. And the final one is a direct object as well. And finally, right, what we did, and I'll stop over here, is basically analyze syntactically the following sentence. I know that this linguistically requires a tree, but we are not. We're going to request or demand that you learn trees, right? Tree mapping in linguistics, really. It's enough for you to identify the larger constituents, especially the subject and the predicate, and then to be able to categorize each of the parts of speech within a sentence. That's really what I would require you to do in the quiz. So we went over several examples like this sentence, right? And we determined the puppy is the subject, found the child is the predicate, the is a determiner, puppy is a noun, found is a verb in the past tense, the is a determiner, and child is a noun. And we went all over the sentences, right, with the rest of the sentences, doing exactly that, right? I left the three examples for you if you have curiosity or you have some sort of like interest in linguistic trees, that this is how that that's my interpretation, of the sentences, if we were going to analyze them syntactically using trees. So, and we discussed several of these examples. But for example, just to do one sentence, right, like this one, the old tree swayed in the wind, we could say that the old tree is the subject, right? Swayed in the wind is the predicate. And then we can break them further down, right? We know that the old tree is a noun phrase, the is a determiner, old is an adjective, tree is a noun. Swayed is the part of the predicate, swayed is the verb in the past, in the wind is a prepositional phrase, in is a preposition, there is a determiner, and wind is a noun. So, well, we did a few more, but that was basically it. So thank you so much, and I hope this works. Bye.